the 18th of May, 1999, Tadeusz Kudelski is standing on the summit of Everest, the first of his countrymen, and only the 12th Pole ever to reach the roof of the world. For the first time in the history of Polish expeditions, a live radio broadcast is going out from a height of 8,800 meters, and soon he begins his descent, and vanishes into a blizzard between two rocky steps, the place where he is seen for the last time. And yet, not one 8,000er stood behind him. His whole life he had climbed in the Andes. Why did an experienced mountaineer never come back from the mountain he had conquered? And why did his radio never make a single sound? On the 3rd of July, 1954, in the poorer part of western Poland, a boy is born who will one day climb to the highest point on the planet. Tadeusz Kudelski grows up in the village of Lubno near Gorzów Wielkopolski, on a plain where the most noticeable rise barely amounts to a hill. Even the place of his birth will be recorded differently from source to source. Some name Lubno itself, others Brzeźnica near Świebodzin, from where the family moves in the first years of his life. A small confusion, but a telling one. About Kudelski, a great deal will remain unsettled. His father runs the local state farm, and Tadeusz's childhood passes to the ordinary rhythm of rural Poland in those years. There is no trace of mountains here, but the boy has the body and the character of an athlete. He throws the javelin, nearly 66 meters, a serious result for a junior, plays tennis, trains at the clubs of Gorzów, first at Warta, then in the student society attached to the Academy of Physical Education. Sport becomes his language before the mountains do, and in it you can already see what sets future high-altitude climbers apart from merely strong men. Not explosive power, but patience, the ability to hold a load for a long time. The javelin is a precise movement in one brief instant. Tennis is endurance and a cool head. Both will come in useful, just at different altitudes. He finishes secondary school, then the Gorzów branch of the Poznan Academy of Physical Education, and in 1978 he receives his diploma. For now he is an ordinary provincial sportsman with a teaching degree and a clear road ahead: school, physical education, the steady life of a teacher. Neither the Himalayas nor tents above 8,000 meters are anywhere to be seen in this biography. So, Kudelski did not begin in the mountains. A plane, a javelin, a tennis racket, and a young man who, for now, has no reason at all to look upward. Everything is changed by a fellow student. In 1976, his classmate from Poznan, Marek Paszkowski, invites Kudelski to try rock climbing, just to go along, just to have a look. They travel to the Sokoliki Crags in the Rudawi Janowiki near Zielenia Góra, low granite rocks, where many Polish mountaineers got their start. Here the javelin and the racket lose all meaning at once. A body used to the horizontal of the stadium stands for the first time against the pull of gravity, and the rocks draw him in more powerfully than athletics ever did. This is something else. Every meter is a separate puzzle, decided not by seconds but by composure and the precise placement of a hand on a hold. Kudelski quickly finds his rhythm. A trip taken to keep a friend company becomes, within a few months, the main occupation of his life. From 1978, he moves from practice crags to real mountains to the Tatras. The scale is now different: long walls, changeable weather, real height beneath his feet. In 1979, he climbs hard lines on the Kazalnica of Morskie Oko, one of the most fearsome walls in the Polish Tatras, including the famous Długosz route. The Kazalnica does not forgive overconfidence. Anyone who climbs it in earnest is no longer an amateur. Kudelski climbs it. He joins the Academic Alpine Club and the High Mountain Club in Poznan, and enters a world where the mountains are no longer a hobby, but a way of life. Around him are people of the same caste. They plan trips, save up for gear, read reports of expeditions to distant ranges. This is where the ambitions are born that, alone on the plains near Gorzów, there was no way to carry. In 3 or 4 years, a provincial PE teacher becomes a technically prepared mountaineer with serious Tatra walls behind him. A chance trip taken for company has turned into a whole new trajectory for his life. But before the mountains carry him far away, a first serious choice is waiting for him at home. While Kudelski is mastering the Tatra walls, he has an ordinary profession. He is a physical education teacher at school number 11 in Gorzów, a secure position, a clear career, a salary, and the respect of a small town. Exactly what is expected of a man with a teaching diploma in Poland at the end of the 1970s. But the early 1980s are a special time. A wave of the independent workers' movement is rising across the country, and Kudelski joins it, like many around him. And in that system, such a thing does not pass without cost. In 1983, it costs him his job. He loses his teaching post, and the road into the state school system is closed to him. For many, this would have been a catastrophe. The loss of a profession, a status, a familiar footing. A man is simply thrown out of the system he has lived in his whole conscious life. Kudelski acts differently. Instead of begging to be taken back, he opens his own business, a firm doing high altitude and construction work. His skills from the crags and walls suddenly turn into a profession. Wherever there is work to be done at height and on ropes, his abilities are worth money. A passion becomes a trade and a livelihood. And here comes an unexpected turn. His own business gives him what a school, with its timetable and academic year, would never have given: time. The owner of a firm decides for himself when to work and when to disappear for a couple of months. And an expedition to far-off mountains always means months. The journey, the acclimatization, the waiting for weather. A hired teacher would have been dismissed for such a thing. There is no one to dismiss a businessman. So the loss of a profession turns out to be not a collapse, but a freedom. Having lost his secure position, Kudelski gains the mountaineer's greatest luxury, the ability to leave for far and for long. And the first truly distant destination for him becomes the mountains of South America. Though he does, in fact, make his debut in the great mountains in the Himalayas. Already in 1980, Kudelski reaches these mountains for the first time, but almost no details of the trip have survived. An early, half-erased episode of his biography. His real mountains turned out to be on another continent. In 1981, Kudelski goes to the Andes, and there he reveals himself for the first time as a high-altitude climber. In 3 months of a single trip, he takes 3 summits, among them Huascarán, the highest mountain in Peru, nearly 6,800 meters. This is not the Tatra walls. To the technical difficulty is added the thin air, and the body works at its limit, where there is half as much oxygen as down below. He handles the altitude well, and understands that he has found his element. The Andes become his true home in the mountains. He returns again and again, the routes growing harder each time. But it is not only height that draws him. In 1983, he goes to Mexico and climbs the rock tower of El Trono Blanco, the White Throne, a sheer wall where everything comes down to the work of the hands on bare stone. The altitude here is modest, less than 2,000 meters, but the difficulty is of a different kind, pure climbing, returning him to those very crags where it all began. He does not entirely abandon the Himalayas either. In 1984, he travels to the Annapurna region for training ascents, sizing himself up against the heights of the 8,000ers. In 1987, he treks through the Langtang Himal Valley, without any summit push, but with a sense of scale that exists nowhere else. And so, his specialization takes shape. Kudelski is not a Himalayan climber in the usual sense, nor a hunter of 8,000ers. He is an andinist, a high-altitude climber whose main mountains are in South America. There lie his roots and his experience. This will come back to haunt him in his final decision. But for now, he is gaining strength and picking up a habit by which people will come to know him. That habit is his weakness for unusual, almost eccentric ventures. By the mid-90s, Kudelski has a signature trick, riding into the mountains on a bicycle. On Kilimanjaro, he hauls it all the way to the highest point of Africa. On Aconcagua, the highest peak of the Americas, he sets out with the same idea, but reaches the top without the bicycle in the end. There is no showing off in these stunts. There is character. Where others rely on raw strength, Kudelski looks for his own way through. The same handwriting shows in his most notable project. In 1998, he launches an Andean expedition, 5 summits for the 5th anniversary of Radio Gorzów, tying mountaineering to the history of his hometown and its radio station. Kudelski moves through the Andes from summit to summit and reaches Ojos del Salado, nearly 6,900 meters, one of the highest volcanoes on the planet and the highest point of Chile. For a man without oxygen cylinders, that is a serious altitude, one that demands full acclimatization. But perhaps more important than the summits is whom he takes with him. For Kudelski, the mountains are not an escape from those close to him. He brings his family along. On the Andean trips, his wife Ewa travels with him. Beneath the volcano, Cotopaxi, she climbs with him to roughly 5,000 meters, a height beyond most people entirely. Later, in the mountains, his son too will be at his side. His expeditions are a shared family affair, not a closed-off male preserve. By the end of the 90s, Kudelski already has more than a dozen notable Andean ascents behind him. An accomplished, respected high-altitude climber with his own niche and his own following back home. A reputation, a family that shares his passion, and a whole continent of mountains that he knows better than anyone in Gorzów. And with all of that, there is one glaring gap in his record. More than a dozen Andean summits, and not a single 8,000er. Not one of those 14 mountains above 8,000 meters that lie in an entirely different world, in the Himalayas and the Karakoram, and he will decide to close that gap suddenly, and he will set his sights straight on Everest. But before that, Kudelski spends one more season in his own element. At the start of 1999, he is back in the Andes. He climbs Sajama, the highest peak of Bolivia, and El Muerto on the Chilean-Argentine border. El Muerto is his 11th notable Andean summit, and he does not go alone. Beside him is his son Piotr, father and son at a height of nearly 6,500 meters. Once again, the mountains as a family affair. And when he returns from the Andes, Kudelski announces the thing no one expected of him. He is going to Everest. To grasp the full strangeness of it, one thing must be kept in mind. Before us stands an andinist. His whole mountaineering life has been spent in South America, all his summits below 7,000 meters, and he has never once stood on an 8,000er. And suddenly, he is aiming straight at the highest point on the planet, a mountain a good kilometer and a half higher than anything he had climbed before. This is not the next step in a career, but a leap over several rungs at once. Those close to him remember the decision as a mild surprise. By their account, Everest had never been Kudelski's chief dream. He was drawn to the Andes and to India, not to the Himalayas as such. He had not been dreaming of the roof of the world for years. The idea seemed to arise out of nowhere, which was exactly what made it so mysterious. Though here, the family contradicts itself. In another interview, his wife, on the contrary, would call Everest his greatest mountain dream, the very thing he had been working toward all along. Whether it was a sudden impulse or a long-nurtured goal can no longer be established. The people closest to him tell it differently, and the truth lies somewhere in between. One way or another, the decision is made. An experienced but not Himalayan climber is heading to a place where his Andean experience will help only in part, and everything else will be new. He cannot go there alone. He needs a team, and one is found, an international expedition bound for Everest. It is called the Polish International Mount Everest Expedition 99. Kudelski is not its star, but one of its members, an ambitious high-altitude climber facing his first acquaintance with an 8,000er. But the expedition is led by a man who knows Everest at first hand, the seasoned Himalayan climber Ryszard Pawłowski, for whom this mountain is not the first. His experience will become Kudelski's main safeguard. The team chooses the northern Tibetan side. It is a decision of principle. The southern side, from Nepal, is the classic and more traveled route, taken by most commercial expeditions. The north is harsher. Fewer people, colder wind, a longer and more draining final ridge. The route leads across the North Col to the Northeast Ridge, the very line of the first British expeditions. A historic and merciless path. A climb at such an altitude is not a dash, but a long siege. The mountain is taken gradually, camp by camp, going up and coming back down again for the sake of acclimatization. In mid-April, the team sets up base camp at 5,200 meters on the glacier at the foot of the vast north wall. Above it grows a chain of intermediate camps. At 7,000 meters, then at 7,600. Each is a ledge wrested from the mountain, a place to catch one's breath before the next push. The highest, the assault camp, is pitched at 8,300 meters. This is already a different world, what mountaineers call the death zone, 3 times less air than below, where the body does not recover but slowly consumes itself. You cannot stay here long. From here you go to the summit and get back down as fast as you can. To pass the last stretch, oxygen is needed. The expedition takes ultralight cylinders of Russian make, compact so they can be carried up without extra weight. On how long the gas holds out, a great deal depends. At 8,000 meters, the oxygen in a cylinder is quite literally a reserve of time, and each man has his own. On the 18th of May, it is all decided. At 3 in the morning, the summit team of 3 leaves the camp at 8,300 meters. All around is total darkness, hard frost, and thin air where every step is twice as heavy. In the light of their headlamps, 3 figures crawl slowly upward, toward a summit still more than half a kilometer away in the vertical. They go separately. On such terrain, a rope does not help but hinders. Each man moves at his own pace, stretched out dozens of meters from the next. Kudelski, Maselko, and Pawłowski climb in effect alone. Only the shared route holds them together. On the ascent, this is normal. By 7 in the morning, at dawn, the 3 make it onto the northeast ridge, that very historic line to the summit. The weather is holding for now. A clear sky, a bearable wind, and the highest point on the planet seems within reach. In hours like these comes the dangerous feeling that everything is going to plan. And then, the first alarming sign. Pawłowski, the most experienced of the 3, runs out of oxygen still on the way up, long before the summit. At over 8,000 meters, this is serious. Without gas, the body freezes faster. Thoughts grow muddled. Every step takes twice the willpower. He keeps climbing, but he is now burning through his own reserves, and at such a height, there are not many of those. Kudelski and Maselko are in a better position. Both move steadily and calmly, gas still in their cylinders. From the outside, it is they who seem the most reliable of the 3, fresh, confident. And the most vulnerable looking is the one whose oxygen has already run out. Ahead of all 3 lie the final meters to the highest point on Earth. Behind them is a long night of climbing, and that the balance of strength is deceptive, that, for now, they are not thinking about. After that, movement almost stops. Around 1 in the afternoon, just below the summit, the 3 wait it out. The wind is picking up, and pushing through it is dangerous. During the pause, they manage to film what is happening, footage that will later enter the history of the expedition. And shortly before 2 in the afternoon, all 3 reach the summit of Everest. There is nowhere higher to go. Beneath their feet is the highest point on the planet. And then something happens that had never occurred in Polish mountaineering before. From the summit goes a live satellite broadcast. For the first time, the voice of a Polish expedition sounds on air straight from the roof of the world. Pawłowski gets through to Radio Z, and the whole country hears men at 8,800 meters. Maselko, meanwhile, calls his family and his school. Ordinary phone calls from a place where a human being has almost no business being. Kudelski has his own private triumph. He leaves 3 flags on the summit, those of Poland, of his hometown of Gorzów, and of the trade union, the very one that once cost him his job. A man who lost his teaching post for his convictions raises the symbol of those convictions to the highest point on Earth. For little Gorzów, it is an event. Their townsman is the first man from Gorzów on the summit of Everest, and only the 12th pole ever to stand here. But the triumph has a second, mournful side. The climb is dedicated to the memory of 5 Polish mountaineers who remained on this very mountain exactly 10 years earlier, in the spring of 1989. Back then, an avalanche on another slope of Everest took a whole team. Reaching the summit on the anniversary of that tragedy, the Poles seemed to pay a debt of memory. One and the same mountain, a place of triumph, and a place from which not everyone returns. Now, on the summit, they try not to think of it. A clear sky, flags in the wind, voices on the air, and the sense that the main thing is done. To the nearest camp there are still hours of descent, but it seems the worst is behind them. It seems. At 3:30, the 3 of them begin the descent, that very way down which, in high-altitude mountaineering, takes more lives than the climb up. Going up, a man is pulled by his goal and by adrenaline. Coming down, he trudges emptied out, at the end of his strength, his attention dulled. It is precisely on the descent, when it seems the job is done, that the mountain collects its main toll. The first to head down are Maselko and Kudelski, the 2 who all day held up the strongest. Pawłowski, left without gas back on the ascent, comes down behind them, and by every calculation it is he who is in the greatest danger. It turned out otherwise, because the weather breaks in a matter of minutes. A moment ago there was a clear sky, And now visibility drops, the wind stiffens, and a snowy haze sweeps across the slope. It buries the tracks before their very eyes, the same tracks by which the three had climbed and hoped to descend. The mountain, which only hours ago had let them up, closes itself off behind a white wall. In that haze, the three lose one another. What on the ascent had been normal turns, on the way down, into disaster. Each man ends up alone. No group, no shared pace. Only separate figures wading through snow and wind, seeing neither their companions nor the route. Each one alone with the mountain, where a mistake is not forgiven. To the weather is added the time of day. Dusk descends onto the slope above 8,000 meters. A day that began in darkness ends in darkness too. Only now the darkness closes over exhausted men who still have far to go down. Cold, wind, haze, and the coming night, all at once, at the worst possible hour. Divided, blinded in the blizzard, overtaken by darkness, the three descend one by one. Two of them will still reach camp by morning. The third, the one who had seemed among the strongest, will vanish into the haze without a trace. He is seen for the last time between two rocky steps of the ridge, the first and the second. One of the most treacherous places on the route, steep rock steps where the descent demands precision. Placing the foot right, finding a hold, not falling. In good weather, an experienced climber passes them calmly. But there is no good weather. Near zero visibility, snow, wind, and every move must be made blind. Each of the three has a radio. This is a standard of safety. A link lets you warn of trouble, call for help, or simply let others know that you are alive and where you are. Down below, in the camps and at base, the team is constantly listening to the airwaves, waiting for any signal. It is enough to press a button and say a couple of words, but the airwaves are silent. On the whole descent, Kudelski never once comes on the radio. He does not call for help, does not report that he has lost his way or fallen, gives no sign at all. Just silence in the headphones of those below, straining into the crackle of static, hoping to make out a voice. It is this very silence that will later give birth to speculation. People will search for last words, a farewell phrase, a cry for help. But there were none. Between the summit and his disappearance, Kudelski said nothing on the air. What happened to him on those steps, no one heard. He does not return to the assault camp at 8,300. Maselko and Pawłowski, exhausted and frostbitten, but alive, do make it to the tents. Kudelski is not with them, hour after hour, and the third figure never emerges from the haze. Where exactly his path broke off, at what moment and why, no one saw. No witness, no radio signal, no trace on the snow-swept slope. Only the fact he went down from the summit and did not arrive. Everything else is silence. Where there are no witnesses and no last words, the imagination goes to work quickly. Around Kudelski's disappearance, versions accumulate over time, beautiful, dramatic, convincing to the ear. The trouble is only that not one of them is in the expedition's records. They are born later, in the retellings, when living memory gives way to legend. By one version, on a difficult stretch, Kudelski took off his crampons, the steel spikes strapped to the boots that hold you on ice and snow. Without them, so the story goes, he slipped on the treacherous terrain. It sounds vivid, but reliable sources do not confirm it, and there is nothing of the kind in the reports. Most likely there is a mix-up here. The episode of the lost crampons belongs to a different Polish mountaineer and a different mountain, and over time, a coincidence of names glued two stories into one. Another version is even more persistent. It attributes last words on the radio to Kudelski, that he supposedly managed to say he was deathly tired before falling silent forever. The phrase migrates from retelling to retelling as a tragic finale, the weary hero bidding the world farewell through the crackle of static. But the expedition leader's report directly refutes it. On the descent, Kudelski did not turn on his radio at all. From his side, the airwaves were silent from beginning to end, which means there could have been no farewell words. Where, then, does the exhaustion come from? From that same report, words about someone moving slowly and being utterly spent did indeed sound, but they referred to other climbers the Poles met on the route that day. Someone else's exhaustion was, over time, pinned on Kudelski. So, behind the beautiful details of the retellings, a truth is uncovered that is far plainer and more mute. There were no crampons taken off, no last phrase on the air. There was silence, a blizzard, and not a single witness. The story one wants to tell is almost always brighter than what actually happened. For those who came down, there is nothing to do but wait. Maselko and Pawłowski, themselves barely alive after the summit and the descent through the blizzard, do not go straight down. They stay in the assault camp at 8,300 an extra day, in the hope that their comrade will yet emerge from the haze. Every hour here they pay for with their own health. At this altitude the body does not rest, but breaks down. But they cannot leave without waiting. Upward, to meet the missing man, go the Sherpas, the most enduring people on the mountain. They comb the stretch of the route, peer at the slope, search for any sign. A track, a piece of gear, a figure on the snow. Nothing. The blizzard that had buried the tracks the day before has hidden everything. The mountain does not give back the one it has taken. On the descent, the Sherpas find another climber in trouble, one more man caught by the same foul weather on the same mountain. They try to help, but here too, the altitude is stronger. In these days, Everest takes more than one man. It is only that, for the Poles, the fate of Kudelski becomes the central one. Hope fades with every hour. Time works against the missing man without mercy. Even if he has sheltered somewhere, the chances of surviving until rescue grow ever smaller. Experienced people understand this better than anyone. The silent radio, the empty slope, the fruitless searches, all of it adds up to one hard conclusion that no one dares to say aloud first. On the 25th of May, the expedition packs up. To wait any longer is pointless and deadly for the living. The team goes down to Kathmandu with the bitterness of having not all come back. On the symbolic cemetery beneath the north wall of Everest, among the plaques of those who did not return, a plaque with Kudelski's name appears too. His body is never found. He stays on the mountain forever. 2 years later, in 2001, a court back home officially declares Tadeusz Kudelski dead. A legal full stop where the mountains themselves never placed one. And what actually happened, no one will ever say for certain now. Even the official version leaves the main thing unresolved. On paper, the cause is simple: an accident, a fall on the descent. The expedition leader puts it as briefly as possible: a wrongly placed step, one imprecise movement on a rocky ledge in a blizzard at the end of one's strength. And the man was gone. The international databases record the same: a fall at around 8,600 meters on the northeast ridge. But behind that spare phrase is emptiness. How exactly he fell, no one described. There was no one to describe it. Pawłowski did not see his comrade fall. 100 meters of broken terrain, and that same haze lay between them. A wrongly placed step is not the testimony of an eyewitness, but the most probable explanation for a place where slipping is the easiest thing in the world. In essence, the official version honestly admits, "We do not know for certain, we are only supposing." The circumstances are examined by a special commission of the Polish Mountaineering Association, headed by Andrzej Zawada, the patriarch of Polish Himalayan climbing. Such a review is needed not to find someone to blame, but to understand whether it could have been done differently. But the commission too runs into the same wall as everyone before it. There is simply nothing from which to reconstruct Kudelski's last minutes. And the tragedy itself sets off a loud debate in Poland about commercial mountaineering. Paid expeditions to Everest are called a dubious enterprise. The sums of the fees are quoted, sometimes wildly inflated, and people argue over whether a not-so-experienced climber should be going to such a mountain for money at all. Kudelski's death becomes an argument in someone else's quarrel about what modern mountaineering has turned into. Coming to his defense is one of the greatest Polish Himalayan climbers, Krzysztof Wielicki. His thought is simple and sober. Everest, after K2, is the most dangerous mountain in the world, and everyone risks dying on it, even the most prepared. It is not about the money or the experience, but about the altitude itself, which grants no discounts to anyone. The argument dies down in time, as all arguments do, but the story of a man from little Gorzów, who climbed to the top of the world and did not come back, remains. It is kept even today in his hometown, decades after that day in May when his radio fell silent forever.